The sand around Uraz was never still. It wrote itself into spirals, erased them, and scrawled new phrases that dissolved before a second glance. Traders who tied their camels outside the bronze gates claimed they could hear the scratching in the dark, yet when they bent down to read it, the presence behind the movement slipped into silence. Only one certainty clung to the wind-scoured city. The Shaharas, the memory-eating serpents, circled forever at the horizon like smoke blown sideways. The Shaharas were not scaled in the way of lesser reptiles. They were made of sand without grain, a drifting lattice of tan light that gathered shape only when hunger ripened. In a single coil, they could rise taller than minarets, tongues flicking out to taste recollection. A traveller caught alone would feel a soft touch against the nape of the mind, then watch entire years scatter like startled doves. Those who survived returned to Uraz blank-eyed, speaking other languages they did not know they knew, while their own names disintegrated between their lips. Because parchment could be devoured no less than thought, the people of Uraz built their archive under the earth, wrapped in layers of cedar trunk, salt bricks, and sleeping scorpions. They believed the venomous guardians would sting any serpent made of flesh or forgetting. Down those spiral steps walked Hessa ibn Shadi, the archivist who had never seen a dawn. Her eyes were silver to the torchlight, polished stones rather than orbs of flesh, for she had traded her sight at birth. So the city whispered to a wandering saint who offered prophecy in return for darkness. Hessa kept the past in ways no ink could keep it. She wove memory into hair, curlicues of women lost to plague, tight braids of merchants slain by jealous partners, beads strung inside the plaits for childhoods cut short. Each night she unbraided the strands, released what she carried, then rewove them anew, so the archive murmured like surf. When someone came seeking a date, a law, or a love, Hessa stood behind a gauze curtain and sang back what had been entrusted to her scalp, yet the curtain thinned. More citizens arrived missing seasons, blotted weddings, subtracting their own faces from family portraits. The Shaharas were feeding more boldly, slithering to the very ramparts under moonless skies. Rumour said they awaited a feast of collective amnesia, a day when the dune-written world would be blank enough for them to coil around time itself and swallow it. On the 14th evening of the month of unmaking, Hessa felt a tug inside her braid, an absence too precise to be an accident. A knot once entrusted by her mother had unravelled. The recipe for honeyed olives her lineage guarded against every plague and siege. Something in the desert had eaten it clean. Hessa's hands shook. The memory was small, useless to empires, yet its theft proved the serpents could infiltrate the archive, despite salt, cedar, and poison. That night the torch smoke drifted upward in the tunnels and shaped a single line of script across the ceiling. Hessa could not see it, but she heard the sizzling of its letters as if they branded air. A novice archivist shrieked, and the line flared out, leaving only the echo. Where first sky kissed its own reflection, the world shall drink and remember. The phrase belonged to a prophecy older than the desert, one Hessa carried inside the knot at the crown of her skull, taught to her by the sightless saint. She had always dismissed it as metaphor, a scholar's toy, polished and useless. Yet now the words broke from stone by themselves, uncoiling like a finger pointing east. There, legend said, lay the first oasis, hidden since the era when rivers walked upright and bargained with humans. Its waters were rumoured to return any memory drained away, but only if reached by one who had already given up their sight. Hessa did not ask the council for permission. She wrapped her head in indigo cloth, wound a bell chime around her left wrist, and took 3 items: a water skin empty of water, yet swollen with prayers, a bone needle, and a crumble of saffron to bribe the sun. If I fail, she told her apprentice, comb my braids and archive what falls out. The city might need those stories more than the shape of my body walking its streets. She stepped beyond the bronze gates at dawn, and the gates forgot her immediately. Uraz was too busy misplacing its own archives to remember a lone woman leaving. Hessa's first companion was a camel named a stranger. Though the beast had never heard the name, she chose it so neither of them felt unfamiliar. The desert outside Uraz showed teeth as gentle as pearl one moment and as serrated as broken glass the next. Dunes rearranged themselves while she trudged, forming corridors with archways of heat. Hessa counted paces, let the bell on her wrist ring each 100th, and recited the lineage of kings so the sound of history marked distance. The Shaharas did not strike at once. They shadowed her in silvery ripples that hummed underfoot. Waiting until the night temperature slid below mercy, Hessa awakened to hushed laughter, like children trailing a secret through reeds. When she lifted her head, the stars seemed to have multiplied, but each new star was a tiny serpent coil lit from within. She felt a sucking at her scalp. Memories tugged, knots loosened. She answered by threading bone needle through braid and pricking her own thumb. "A drop of blood for a drop of oblivion," she whispered. At trade, she let one childhood sorrow seep away while protecting the coordinates of the first oasis. The serpents lapped at the offered grief, believing her domesticated, and slithered back into sand satisfied for now. Morning found the desert red with dawn, the way raw metal is red before it cools. "No," Stranger complained, kneeling until Hessa covered its eyes with linen. She too functioned on sound, on scent. Iron in wind signaled far-off meteor craters. Sulfur foretold a hot spring buried. But today she smelled cinnamon, impossible this far from the trade routes. She recognized it as dream logic, the desert seasoning itself with the improbable to lure pilgrims from straight paths. She said aloud. "What do you want me to forget, Cinnamon Wind?" The air did not answer, yet she felt a swirl of longing for a name she might have once carried, a lover's or a sister's. She wrapped it in new braid before it could evaporate. 3 more days slid by, measured in dwindling water sips and the mirage of bells. On the 4th dusk, she discovered a village constructed entirely of mirrors, each pane framed by ribs of whales that must have swum the sky before oceans learned restraint. The mirrors showed only afternoon, regardless of the hour. Hessa observed them, though not with eyes, and saw reflections of lives that had never been. Herself as cartographer marking routes across constellations, herself as serpent priestess feeding birds to sand. An elder stepped from one reflective wall. His hair was turquoise glass, and through his transparent chest, she saw her own braided self walking into his heart. "The Shaharas once nested here," he said. "We traded them memories of storms in exchange for soft rains, but storms are finite, and hunger grows. What will you give them when you reach their brood at the edge of the first oasis?" "Whatever I can bear to live without," Hessa replied. "The oasis is not a bowl," the elder warned. "It is a mirror of a who drink unwisely, and their histories returned may not fit the throats that receive them. A man might wake, fluent in wars he never fought, and choke on guilt. All archives cut. Some blades sever, some shave, I will choose." Satisfied or indifferent, the elder touched her forehead with 2 glass fingers that rang like prayer bells. Vision unfurled, not sight, but a tapestry of correlations. Heat lines connecting to lost capitals, snake tracks overlaying constellations, a single dune shaped like the knotted curricle of her mother's recipe. She saw the route. When she turned away, the mirror village had reverted to bare sand, no debris, no whale ribs. Even no strangers snorted, as if waking from layered sleep. They travelled beneath new stars, ones Hessa had never memorized, faintly green, forming glyphs for verbs the city of Uraz no longer possessed. She wondered if sky too lost memories to serpents. Perhaps constellations that once told of earlier gods had been gnawed into anonymity. The thought steadied her. She was not alone in loss. At the cusp of the 9th night, the desert ceased being desert. It turned into parchment. Every granule flattened, braided with neighbor grains until the floor resembled a titanic scroll unrolling toward the horizon. Letters 10 paces tall inked themselves where she stepped, recording the weight of her passing. Hesse knelt, brushed a fingertip across a line, and tasted the shape of the words. Here walks the woman who remembers forgetting. The parchment cracked like onset frost. Shaharas rose from fissures, larger than before, emboldened by the density of stories beneath. They circled in spirals of beige light, scales flickering with captured anecdotes, laughter of children, the final sigh of a poet, the clang of a bronze gate shutting. 20, 30, perhaps 100 of them. The desert's horizon became their fanged halo. Nor, stranger bucked and fled into non-existence, vanishing between two eyelids' blinks, perhaps never to have been born. Hesse alone stood on the living scroll. A serpent, wider than a city street, slowly descended until its head hovered before her heart. She felt its request rather than heard it. Offer. She unwound the longest braid, the one that contained the genealogies of Urazi fishermen stretching back to when the desert still dreamed of water. She raised it like a banner. Take this net of names, she said, but grant me clear passage to the place where sky first kissed itself. The serpent's mouth did not open. It simply absorbed the braid, strand by strand, turning each into a ripple along its sandy spine. When the final bead clinked into oblivion, the creature lowered its head, drawing a circle on the parchment with its tongue. Inside the circle flickered a gate of blue fire. Drink nothing until Oasis, the serpent hissed. Words like sand poured on glass and withdrew. The others followed, their myriad bodies braiding into a cyclone that bored into the dunes. Hesse stepped through the blue gate before Tao could whisper. The world shifted. Heat sank away. She smelled petrichor, older than rain. Stone cooled by starlight. Mint leaves bruised between youthful fingers. In the darkness ahead shimmered a pool the color of unspoken wishes. It lay silent, yet she heard stories rushing beneath its skin like fish darting under ice. First Oasis, she greeted, and fell to her knees. Water lapped, forming syllables. Drink, Archivist. Hesse's hands trembled as she lifted her waterskin. She recalled the Mirror Elder's warning. Returned histories may choke the unready. So she sutured her fears with saffron along the rim, the last flavor of home, and dipped. The first mouthful tasted of lime blossom and funeral incense. Memories not her own flooded behind her blind eyes. Mammoths crossing grass seas, children learning metallurgy from meteors, the first sailor naming constellations while drifting beyond sight of land. She swallowed, welcoming them into the archive of flesh. The second mouthful held bitterness and silver. She remembered Yeraz as it had been before Sandon Island, where palms bent over turquoise bays, and understood that the city's desert exile was self-chosen, a penance for crimes scrubbed away by collective forgetting. She felt the guilt of ancestors slacken, no longer inaccessible. The third she poured over her scalp. The water slid between braids, reweaving them with truths returned. She heard tiny knots click into place. Her mother's honeyed olives recipe. The laughter of a sister she never had, but now did, because the Oasis restored lost possibilities as readily as actual past. Hesse wept. Her tears fueled the pool's glow. When her skin could hold no more stories, she sealed the water skin, heavy now with shimmering weight. I will bear you back, she promised. But Oasis water demanded offering in kind. A ripple crept up her arms, a gentle sting. In exchange for restored histories, it would take away her loneliness, her private corridors where only her thoughts echoed. Hesse stiffened. Solitude was Archive's scaffolding, yet she accepted. Loneliness drained like smoke exhaled, leaving room for voices that would forever murmur within. The path home was a fold, not a line. She stepped once and found herself outside Yeraz at noon, the bronze gates ringing with panic. Crowds milled, forgetting their own despair as they recognized her shape. Shaharas lined the battlements, docile now, coiled like ornamental pillars. Children leaned over walls to stroke them, remembering grandmother's lullabies that had seemed to vanish yesterday but drifted back overnight. Merchants argued access to ledgers once erased. The city vibrated with sudden fullness, like a lung taking first breath after nearly drowning. Hessa walked among them, giving each a sip from the water skin. With every mouthful poured, a serpent dissolved into grains that blew harmlessly east, as if they were merely hunger given form. And now sated. Citizens recovered festivals, secret recipes, debts owed and forgiven, and the real names of lovers whose reputations had been sanded down to rumor. When the skin's last droplet glimmered on the tongue of a beggar who turned out to be the lost ruler of 3 dynasties, the water skin sagged dry. A hush settled. The archive inside Hessa's braids bulged, yet she felt no weight. It floated buoyant on newly shared memory. She raised her silver eyes to the sun she could not see. "Story is water," she announced. "Deny it passage, and it floods elsewhere. Hoard it, and it stagnates. Move with it, and world remembers itself." The people listened, and the walls of Yiraz sprouted fig trees whose roots reached down to the buried archive, drinking the older salt and exhaling green. Hessa guided apprentices to weave fresh braids, not of sorrow but of songs. That night she slept atop the highest minaret. In dreams she met the Shararas coiled around the moon, no longer hungry. They shed skins of sand, revealing spines made of luminous script. "We guarded forgetting," they told her, "because forgetting too is holy. Now you guard remembrance. Keep the balance." She touched their glowing scales, acknowledging the contract. When she awoke, a single serpent scale lay beside her, a droplet of moonstone scratched with cinnamon scent. She braided it into her hair, where it would chime against the bell at her wrist and remind every ear that memory's echo is never solitary. And the desert around Yarath continued to write and erase itself. But now, whenever the wind scratched new script, children learned to read it aloud before it vanished, turning each disappearance into arrival. Hessa listened to their voices and understood the prophecy had never belonged to parchment or saint. It had waited in throats all along, ready for water to teach them what they already knew.